So, like, I don't think this is a controversial statement that that classical music is a little bit hard to get into, and I think it's really just sort of about the fact that you can't really judge their work, sort of in a singular way. There's always the fear that the interpretation of their work that you're listening to is not the one that somebody else has listened to, or not like the historically best one or whatever. Like, there's so many versions of, say, like Beethoven's 10th Symphony or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many versions of it that it really comes down to, like, oh, do I just, like this or dislike this due to this specific interpretation, this specific version of it, or is there something else going on? Like, there's not a definitive version of classical music. It's really something that sort of bothers me about it, something that makes it hard for me personally to really get into it. It's like, if you could point me to an album, like now, like you just go, hey, listen to this album, this will tell you all about this guy. You can't do that with classical music. You can't be like, oh man, here's a really good Mozart album, because Mozart didn't make albums, because that wasn't a concept back then. You can say, here's a Mozart song, but then you gotta add to that, but out of the 250,000 versions of this song, make sure not to hit this one. Like, you gotta point out one specific version. What if I don't like that version? What if there's other, you know what I mean? I know this is a really stupid video topic, but I don't know, it is just a concern I have, because I would like to get into classical music. I think it'd be cool, that's a big glaring sort of omission in my music knowledge and my music understanding, is classical, and I'd like to remedy that. I'd like to get into classical music, but the lack of definitive versions of a classical song, of a classical musician's works, that really limits it. You know what I mean? Because it's like, pretty much all we have to go by are covers. There is no definitive version of a song. We're just listening to a bunch of covers. Like, can you imagine if, say, like, what's this song? This isn't like a great song or anything, but it's one that's been covered a lot. Can you imagine if Who Let the Dogs Out, like, you could only listen to covers? There was 100 billion thousand covers, but it was only covers. That wouldn't be Who Let the Dogs Out, in my opinion. It would not be the classic 10 out of 10 work from the Baha Men that the Baha Men version is, because it's someone else's interpretation of that work. And I realize that to an extent that's what classical music is all about, is hearing people's interpretation of a work, seeing what they can do with it from the sheet music, from the basic outline that these composers have created. But I don't know, I guess that's just not how I typically come to enjoy music. Like, I'm much more into, especially with artists, like, if I was gonna find a favorite composer, like, I like tracking the evolution of an artist's sound. I like really getting into sort of the world that they've created. I like seeing definitive projects, which you can't really do in classical, because of the fact that, like I said, there is no albums. There's individual songs, and even so, there's not an easy way to listen to all of their songs in order. You know what I mean? Like, you really do have to go out of your way to find that. You know what I mean? Like, there's not like a Spotify playlist or anything, or like an album on Spotify that's like Mozart from the beginning to the end. You know what I mean? Like, that's just not a thing. Which is really a problem when you're trying to to do that, when you're trying to connect with an artist sort of on an artistic level, and you want to see them grow and change, and you want to connect with them and sort of see where they're coming from, you can't do that because you're just listening to a bunch of covers. A bunch of covers that, you have to go out of your way to hear in order. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I can listen to the first symphony, and it's played by this orchestra, but then second symphony is not played by that orchestra, so I can't even follow it on that level. There's always going to be these weird differences that are really gonna hinder your experience listening to a classical artist. You know what I mean? Because if you are listening to them in order, if you figured out a way to listen to them in order, you know what I mean? It's like, well, you have to make sure that whatever orchestra, whatever band, whatever artist or group of artists that is interpreting the work, you really have to find one that they've done it all, because if not, there is variables that can hamper your experience listening to this. And then after that, whichever the first experience of a classical piece that you're going to listen to, every piece after that is just going to be a remix, which I don't know. Am I being weird about this? Is this actually a concern, or am I just weird? I don't know. Comment below. Is this a concern for you? Are my reasons making sense? Make sure to follow, do all that stuff. Niche and nice, etc. Purified.